Our first guest speaker is Ms. Leerehanan, who is an Australian politician and a former senator for the New South Wales. Ms. Leerehanan has been an ardent advocate of human rights and has been raising her voice in support of human rights causes globally. Believing in the universal principles of dignity, equality, and mutual respect, she has been a beacon of hope and light for the oppressed people world over.
Thank you. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay tribute to their history, their culture and their ongoing fights for justice, tragically which there are so many. Thank you to the organisers for the invitation to speak today, February 5, Kashmir Solidarity Day, a day marked around the world. This year's Kashmir Solidarity Day has even greater significance. It is the first time that this important occasion has been held since the Indian government locked down 7 million people in the Kashmir Valley. These people are shut off from the rest of the world. The Indian government took this extreme action to hide the full extent of the crimes they are committing against the Kashmiri people. Tonight, we need to speak about these crimes. Firstly, a comment about how I come to be speaking tonight. When I was a senator, I was asked to speak about Kashmir. On reading up on that issue, I felt quite ashamed at how little I knew about the struggle. I've been interested in international politics since I was 15, but I realised I had no in-depth or very little knowledge at all. I made the speech and followed it up in 2018 by visiting refugee camps in Kashmir. The saddest thing for me was meeting family members who had not seen their loved ones for decades. Many described to me about standing on the banks of the river that divides them and waving and shouting above the roar of the river to family members on the other side. I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and the thought of my family, of any family being divided like this, is so painful to even think about. Many other stories from the refugees I met on that visit were harrowing to hear, about disappearances, pellet gun shootings and beatings by Indian troops. The pain they spoke about stretches back for decades. On August 5 last year, life became much harder for the people of Kashmir and Jammu. Without warning the public, without reference to the Kashmiri Parliament or the Indian Parliament, the Modi government completely took over this region. The Indian government removed Jammu and Kashmir's statehood and special status. This means Kashmir can no longer make its own laws, have a flag or its own constitution. Kashmir and Jammu are now completely ruled from Delhi. India enforced a curfew and a communications blackout on Kashmir and Jammu. This has meant little local media coverage of the crimes against humanity being perpetrated by the Indian forces in this region. It is a fair assumption that with 50,000 additional Indian troops sent to Kashmir and Jammu in early August, which takes the total number of Indian military personnel to around 800,000, that the number of crimes have escalated. The job of the military has been to enforce severe travel restrictions, to lock up more than 300 political leaders and activists, and to staff the numerous security checkpoints. And clearly, harassing local people is a big part of what these troops do. Arundhati Roy, the internationally acclaimed author who lives in Delhi, has described how local reporters, at great personal risk, have travelled widely in this region to write up what is happening. This provides an insight into why the Indian government is attempting to censor news of these crimes. These are Arundhati Roy's words. The news was of nighttime raids, of young men being rounded up and beaten for hours, their screams broadcast on public address systems for their neighbours and families to hear, of soldiers entering villagers' homes and mixing fertiliser and kerosene into their winter food stocks. The news was of teenagers with their bodies peppered with shotgun pellets being treated at home because they would be arrested if they went to a hospital. The news was of hundreds of children being whisked away in the dead of night, of parents debilitated dominated by desperation and anxiety. The news was of fear and anger, depression, confusion, steely resolve, and incandescent resistance. The current situation for people in Kashmir and Jammu is clearly shocking, but we need to remember that Kashmiris have been grappling with violence for much longer than the past 6 months. A 1993 Human Rights Watch report stated that Indian security forces, and I quote, assaulted civilians during search operations, tortured and summarily executed detainees in custody, and murdered civilians in reprisal attacks. A 2010 US State Department report stated that the Indian Army in Jammu and Kashmir had carried out extrajudicial killings of civilians and suspected insurgents. The mental anguish caused by the brutality of the Indian occupation is extreme. I saw evidence of this when I spoke to people in the refugee camps. A 2015 survey by Médecins Sans Frontières found that nearly 1.8 million adults in Kashmir, which is about 45% of the population, have shown symptoms of mental distress. Today, the overall health of people in Kashmir and Jammu is further deteriorating because of the Indian enforced curfew and communication shutdown. Many hospitals are unable to obtain supplies. People requiring emergency assistance often cannot access services, and those with serious health conditions are suffering as critical medicine supplies run low. Kashmiri women carry a particularly heavy burden. Later this month, on the 23rd of February, it is Kashmiri Women's Resistance Day, an annual event inspired by the struggles of the survivors of the mass rape in the villages of Kunan and Pushpora. These crimes occurred on the night of the 23rd of February 1991. While the girls and women of their villages were raped, the village men were subjected to horrific torture. Human Rights Watch in its 1993 report found that despite the widespread evidence of sexual violence perpetrated by the Indian Army and paramilitary forces, few of the incidences are ever investigated by the authorities, and no prosecution of alleged rapists in the military or security forces has occurred. Physicians for Human Rights and Asia Watch have conducted investigation into rape by the military in Kashmir, and it's documented in their report, Rape in Kashmir. Médecins Sans Frontières has reported that 11.5% of Kashmiris have directly experienced sexual violence, many of them repeatedly. Complaints to the police, however, are rarely registered, and investigations and prosecutions for these crimes virtually never take place. The lack of investigation is because the Indian Armed Forces Special Powers Act gives troops and security forces effective immunity from prosecution for serious human rights abuses. This law is enforced in Kashmir and Jammu. Numerous reports, including from UN experts, have called for the repeal or at least a review of this act. This has not occurred. In recent months, the Indian government has talked up the restoration of communications and has issued normalcy declarations. Despite these assertions, there continue to be numerous reports that Kashmir remains under heavy oppression. Most classrooms are still empty, streets largely deserted, military checkpoints continue to operate, and foreign journalists are banned. While some communications, such as landlines, have been restored, that is a meaningless gesture in this day and age when so many people depend on the internet.